Hello and welcome to the Analyst of Vajiram and Ravi for 2nd of April 2024. We'll be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and Indian Express for UPSC examination. The very first topic that we are trying to cover is the solar surge with respect to a very recent government initiatives to promote the manufacturing of solar panels in the country. In the next article, we'll be looking at a recent dispute between Sri Lanka and India regarding a small island between the same, which is known as Katchatheevu Island. In the next article, we'll be looking at the analysis of the PMLA Act and the various issues regarding the same. In the next one, we'll be looking at the recent history of RBI over the last 90 years. And in the final article, we'll be looking into the recent discovery of ozone layer on a moon of the Jupiter. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the session with Prelims Snippet because as you know, the Prelims is very near and we will be trying to consolidate our revision for our Prelims from the newspaper itself. Beginning today's discussion, we'll be starting to look at a very important government initiative to promote the manufacturing of solar panels in the country. Now here, as we know that the financial year has started from 1st April and this is the time period that is financial year 1st April of 2024 where a very important government scheme related to the solar panel manufacturing within the country will be inaugurated and launched finally. And we'll be looking into the very basics aspects of the same initially, and this is a very important topic for UPSC prelims because we have to look at the various issues of environmental ecology, biodiversity and climate change, and also very important for GS3 where we will be looking at two important aspects. First from economy, that is infrastructure, where we have the topic of energy, and also environment where we have the topics of conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, where we have the topics of renewable energy, and within the same we have to look at the various aspects of the solar sector in the country. Now, we know that as a country, we have a commitment towards mitigating the negative impacts of the climate change. And for that, India has actually given 5 solutions from India's own side. These are actually also known as nationally determined contributions, which were, kind of legally binding under the Paris Agreement. Now, starting with the topic, we know that India has made various commitments to combat climate change on its own state, on its own terms. And we generally know this as nationally determined contributions of the country, where almost all of the countries in the world which are under the Paris Agreement, they have to submit their own climate change goals. And these goals are typically related to the reduction of the use of fossil fuels, using more and more renewable energy capacities and so on. So in India, we have something which we know as Panchamrit, which are India's 5 goals or 5 ways of reducing the impact of climate change via a sustainable way of energy and so on. So the green commitments, which are India's own, nationally determined contributions. Firstly, India is trying to achieve 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. Next, India is trying to have the 50% of its energy generation and also the installed capacity of energy from renewable sources, that is solar, wind and so on, by 2030. In the next target, India is trying to reduce the overall carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030 again. And in the next one, India is also trying to reduce the carbon intensity to GDP, or the amount of carbon dioxide emissions divided by the total GDP of the country, by around 45% by 2030 again. And finally, the most important target that India is achieving or trying to achieve is achieving net zero. Net zero means whatever carbon dioxide we are emitting and whatever carbon dioxide we are mitigating, that overall net effect must be zero. So that we are trying to achieve by 2070. And for this, the government has plethora of government schemes related to the promotion of renewable energies in the country, be it solar, wind, mini hydro and other renewable energies. We find that the government is trying to push in a lot of funds in the same. And when we concentrate on a particular sector within the renewable sector, that is solar sector, we find the government is particularly more emphasizing in promoting the solar sector. And that is why India, since a long time, say since 2010 and 2014, India has been importing a lot of solar panels from countries, especially China. especially like China, because India does not have its own domestic capacity of production of solar panels. And that is why we have been overall kind of dependent on another country. And that is why we are also, increased amount of reliance on the solar panels. We are kind of depending on China, as we can also see from this figure. This figure is from the January to April of 2022 year. From 2020 to 2022, we find that the reliance of the imports of solar panels is kind of very huge. And that is why the first important aspect when we are trying to diversify in our energy sources, it is actually to reduce the dependence on the countries such as China. Then we have to also understand that the targets that we have set, for example, achieving 500 gigawatts of renewable energy, particularly non-fossil fuel energy by 2030, and mostly we have to understand the solar power within this 500 target is around 280 gigawatts. So roughly around 280 gigawatts out of the overall 500 gigawatts, we have to source it from solar energy. So we have to understand the importance of solar energy in realizing our Panchamrit targets is huge. As of now, the installed capacity in India is around 73 gigawatt as of December 2023. And the leading states here are Rajasthan followed by Gujarat. So very, very important facts for the prelims. And the point to be noted here that the installed capacity in India is very, very less according to the target that we have to achieve within the next 6 years. So we have to understand within the next 6 years, we have to devote additional 200 gigawatts of solar power energy. And that is why right now also we have to understand government of India is taking many initiatives to promote the same. Firstly, let us look at the India's National Electricity Plan of 2018. So in 2018, they assumed that over a period of time, India will be trying to reduce the growth of use of coal and increase the use of renewable energy. As you can see, as of financial year 2022, the use of renewable energy is roughly around at 175 gigawatts, and it will be increased to around 275. So, and this is why we have to understand within renewable, solar energy is a very, very large component, as we can also see from this diagram here. So this is according to the reports of the WEF, and here we can understand from 2006 to 2014 to 2022 and finally to 2030, we can understand most of the renewable energy will be dominated by two sectors, wind and solar. And between these two, solar energy is dominating right now, and in the future by 2030 it will be also dominating in the future. Next, India is trying to promote solar parks, which are very, very large areas of fields which are filled with solar panels. So as of now, India is trying to build and construct and finance 51 solar parks in the country. And here also we find that the leading states are Gujarat, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and so on. Right? And also we saw that right now the installed capacity in India is 73 gigawatt roughly. And we have seen this is, a vast amount of increase and improvement over the 3.7 gigawatt, which was prevalent almost around 10 years ago. So within 10 years, we tried to add more than 150 gigawatts. So this is also kind of appreciable, but within the next, 6 years, we have to add 200 more gigawatts. And how this is being achieved? Through many government schemes. Firstly, India is trying to achieve the same with PLI scheme related to the manufacturing of solar PV modules. And here India is trying to encourage the domestic manufacturing of the solar PV modules. Next, Indian government has also has a very, very innovative scheme known as the Modified Special Incentive Package, which is trying to give around 20 to 30% subsidy on the amount of capital expenditure that is needed to install solar energy capacity. So we can understand that buying and building and constructing a solar park, solar panel requires huge kind of funding. So this is a kind of subsidy which is given. Next, the Atal Jyoti Yojana is trying to promote solar lighting on the streets, and this will be on the basis of the areas in particular states where the grid electricity the grid electricity, particularly fueled by the coal thermal power plants, is very poor according to the census 2011. In the next one, the PM Kusum, which is a very important scheme, and also this question came in 2020 mains. This PM Kusum is a very important scheme which is trying to promote solar pumps in the rural areas to reduce the amount of electricity which is consumed by the farmers, right, which are driven by the coal thermal power plants. And you know that in rural areas, electricity is free of cost given to the farmers. So to reduce the amount of coal based electricity, the government is giving solar based solar pumping. Next, we have various solar park schemes, as was also illustrated in the graph which was shown in the previous slide. The solar park scheme is typically concerned with a large amount of field filled with solar panels, and this is connected to the grids of the electricity distribution companies, and the solar power energy will be circulated within the same. So the government is trying to build around 51 of the solar parks, approx around generating 500 megawatts. Next, we have also this Shrishti scheme, which is sustainable rooftop implementation of solar transfiguration of India. And following this, recently, as of the budget 2023-2024 interim budget, we also heard about a scheme which is known as Pradhan Mantri Surya Dev Yojana, which is kind of also in tandem with the rooftop solar program. Now, the rooftop solar program is actually installing solar panels on the rooftops of various individuals, particularly from the lower income classes and the middle income classes of the population. So, in the particular Surya Dev Yojana, around 300 free units of electricity will be provided to these households if they install and if they have the architecture and infrastructure of the solar panels on their rooftops. And the government of India will be also giving various subsidies on actually building these solar panels. The final details of the scheme is yet awaited in the public discourse, but this was a scheme which was announced in the budget, and hence it is very important for the examination also. And finally, we understand that recently, as of the new financial year, this new policy of promoting domestic solar panels is in force. And here, this is a very rigorous certification process of the individuals in the country, of the manufacturers in the country who will be manufacturing solar panels. We know that solar panels are actually the basic raw materials, basic ingredient for building, for actually realizing the goal of climate change ambitions, and also achieving 500 gigawatts of energy, right, from renewable and non-fossil fuel sources. So solar panels and the manufacturing within the country is very important. And here, the certification process will be very rigorous. This will be promoting domestic manufacturing. The certificate will be given to domestic manufacturers, and solar panels will be needed to submit their facilities for inspection to the National Institute of Solar Energy. Because there are various government schemes, as we have seen. And for the government schemes, the various government entities, the private individuals, they need to purchase solar panels. And they can do two things. First, import from the other countries, and can buy from the own, say, markets and the domestic markets. So, to promote the domestic manufacturing, we are trying to certify those manufacturers who are producing good quality solar panels. And here, this will be under the approved models and manufacturers of solar photovoltaic models. Requirement, this means that for any kind of government scheme, for procuring any kind of government tenders, the manufacturers have to be certified with this standard. And here, finally, the benefits will be what? The benefits will be accessing the government programs and the tenders related to the same. And also, for example, the PM Solar Rooftops scheme, which is trying to procure many solar panels to build rooftops, solar panels on the various houses of the people, right? And here, for the government to procure the solar panels, the government will be procured from the domestic manufacturers, and they will be producing more wafers of solar panels, and here they will be having the benefits of increased profits, increased employment, increased investment, and so on. So this is actually a very good way to go by certifying the domestic manufacturers with respect to their quality, pricing, and each and every factor related to promotion of solar panels in the country. In the next article, we'll be looking at a recent dispute which is out in the news related India, Sri Lanka, and an island between them that is known as the Katchatheevu. And here, there are many diplomats retired and also serving diplomats who are giving this opinion to the people that any move by the government, that is by the Indian government, to revisit the 1974 Sri Lanka India Treaty and agreement on the island will be having broader diplomatic issues. This is very important for our syllabus of prelims, where we have to look at the current events of national and international importance, particularly in mapping, and in GS2 we also have to look at India and her neighborhood too. So here, let us first look at the Katchatheevu Islands. If you can see properly, it is just located off the coast of Rameshwaram, that is in the state of Tamil Nadu. And also this is just located near Jaffna, which is the northernmost province and northernmost part of the country of Sri Lanka, right? And here, this is a very important island because in the recent past and also in the distant past, this island's origin and the ownership of the island has been debated time and ever since. Now here, this island is an uninhabited area. No one generally lives in the place here, and also this is located in the Park Strait. As you can see, the length is only just mere 1.6 kilometer. Around the broadest point on this island, it was 200 meters wide. So the island is very small. And also we can understand that this island has a volcanic origin and a very recent origin, that is from the 14th century, right? So the island is also typically new island, and since the medieval period, this island was under the Jaffna kingdom of Sri Lanka. Right now, these historical facts are very important while we are trying to gauge the ownership of the country and the ownership of the island. Is the island with India or Sri Lanka? The history will be telling us. Now, initially in the medieval times, it was under the Jaffna kingdom. Next, in 17th century, gradually the Ramna Zamindari class under the Rameshwaram areas in Tamil Nadu, they kind of captured these islands, right? Then gradually, when the colonies of the European powers started settling down, it was also submerged or say engulfed in the part of the Madras Presidency. And in 1921, India and Sri Lanka started claiming the islands with respect to fishing boundaries. Now we understand that the area Park Strait and the area between these two nations here is a very rich fishing ground. And here, the Indian fisher folk from the state of Tamil Nadu and the Sri Lanka fisher folk from the country of Sri Lanka, they try to vie for the islands for fishing stocks. And often it has been found from historically, from historical times, that the people from the either nations have been kind of contending for the waters of this area, particularly for fishing stocks. And finally, in the modern times, in the 20th century, according to a survey, this island was actually given to Sri Lanka, according to this survey. But the British claimed that it is actually belonging to India under the Ramnar kingdom. Now here, this was the very early seeds of contentions. Now, gradually after independence, there was a very significant Indo-Sri Lankan Maritime Agreement of 1974, which was pioneered by Indira Gandhi during that time. And in this agreement, it was told that the island was actually ceded to Sri Lanka. And because we have to understand, in 1970s when this agreement was actually signed, the island had little strategic significance to India. And also, if India is actually ceding the island to Sri Lanka, it will be also deepening and improving the ties with our neighboring nations too. That is why, keeping these things in mind, India kind of ceded the island to the Sri Lanka. And here, Indian fishermen were actually allowed access to the island. But Sri Lanka here started creating some issues by telling that in this agreement, it has been not explicitly told that fisher folk from India will be allowed to fish in the waters near the Katchatheevu Island. And Sri Lanka interpreted the agreement as that the Indian fisher folk will have the access to this island with reference to resting, drying their nets, fishing nets, or say visiting the Catholic shrine without any visa. So this much is agreed, but Sri Lanka did not allow the fishing terms with the sea. Now, when the emergency was also ongoing in India in 1976, now there was a new agreement which totally nullified the earlier agreement, which tried to decrease the significance of the earlier agreement here. And here, this barred either of the countries from going across their exclusive economic zones. And this is actually kind of an uncertain decision which was taken in this agreement. Now, this uncertainty is still now there as to if both of the countries cannot go beyond their exclusive economic zones, then the ownership of the Katchatheevu Islands is also kind of debated. Now here, after the Sri Lanka, civil war, right, that was taking place in 1983 from 2009, Jaffna, which is the northern province of Sri Lanka, which was at the center, because from here only the mainly LTTE, Sri Lankan Liberation Armies were actually present and operating from the same. So what the Sri Lankan government did, they tried to cut away Jaffna from mainland Sri Lanka. And if you can see, Katchatheevu Island is also close to Jaffna. Now, if the rest of the Sri Lanka is cut away from Jaffna, so this was a very, very good opportunity for the Indian fisher folk to actually go to the Katchatheevu Islands and try to fish in these areas. Right? Now, this was while this Sri Lankan civil war was taking place during this period of time. Now, this period of time, it was the season of overfishing by Indians. But once the Sri Lankan civil war concluded, Sri Lanka tried to boost its maritime security by by actually investing a lot of resources in the maritime defense, and particularly targeting whatever Indian fishermen that actually came from the Indian side to the Sri Lankan sides, and especially to the Katchatheevu Islands. So from 2009 onwards, Sri Lanka became very, very active and very, very reactive rather against the Sri Lankan, against the Indian fisher folk from the particular area here. Now, Indian fisher folk after 2009 or since 2009, they have been kind of facing resource depletion in kind of decreasing fish stocks in this particular area, and that is why they have to go towards the Sri Lankan waters. Now, in the Indian sides, the fish stocks have declined, and this is the kind of issue that they are facing also due to climate change, and that is why they are kind of tempted and obliged to go to the Sri Lankan waters. But whenever the fisher folk right now are going, they are being arrested, they are being undergone custodial tortures, and also some of the fisher folk has also died from these incidents. So that is why this issue is a very, very important issue, particularly in also the politics of the state of Tamil Nadu, because most of the fisher folk are from the particular state here. And here, from the government of India's perspective, after the amendment to the original agreement here, the government's consistent claim was that the Ministry of External Affairs actually tried to deny any ceding or any accusation of the territory of Katchatheevu related to the areas, and also the stance of the Indian Parliament and the Indian departments to the same is also very, very vague. And here, in recent times, in the recent ongoing election debates, there has been a clamor for actually renegotiating the agreement again. But we know that if there was an agreement in the past, and if we are trying to renegotiate by reopening the terms and conditions of the agreement, then this is not good for the friendly relations between the two nations, particularly when recently India has also tried to assist Sri Lanka during the crisis that Sri Lanka was facing. And also India has various amount of initiatives with Sri Lanka, such as the Colombo Security Enclave and the investments that India has in the country, and also the good amount of cultural ties that the two countries share. It is very, very difficult to open the agreement for discussion again, particularly harming the Sri Lankan interests here. Then we have to also clarify on the other side the fisher folks' rights, because under the original agreement, rights were given to the fisher folk, but it was Sri Lanka who contended that the rights were not related to fishing but other kind of rights. So there must be a discussion, there must be a bilateral kind of agreement and proper amount of discourse on the rights of the fisher folk, particularly to the human rights violations also which is taking place in the island areas too. Next, whenever we try to renegotiate any kind of international agreement, particularly when we try to nationalize the interests in the same case here, we also risks India's reputation. And here we also understand, if we are trying to renegotiate with Sri Lanka on this particular agreement, then there are other agreements with reference to Bangladesh land border sharing, with Pakistan's Indus Water Treaty. So the rest of the countries, they will also put pressure on India to renegotiate according to their own interest, according to their own national agendas. So India has to tread very cautiously in this issue. Particularly also we find China in the Indian Ocean region right now. China is also trying to trap Sri Lanka using debt and using various other kind of instruments here. So we have to also be cautious with the Chinese angle in this region, because India is also trying to counter China militarily and also indirectly through these countries. And finally, we have to understand it is for the greater interest of the entire region, right? South India and Sri Lanka as a distinct economic market, as a distinct entity, which can which can also elevate India to the next level of ties with Sri Lanka. And then we can understand that if we are on good terms and good conditions, and we try to negotiate with some countries according to their interests and our interests too, we can be on a better pedestal on this matter. The next editorial and the next article is reference to the PMLA Act and the various analysis within the same. Now, this is a very, very important editorial which is trying to talk about the background of the Act and also the various issues with the Act. So, we'll be discussing the same here pertaining to the topic of prelims, which is polity and governance, and also in GS2 we have the various important aspects of governance in the country. Now here, firstly, let us introduce the PMLA Act. The full form is Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002. Now see, the very name of this act is containing a very, very important term, which is money laundering. Money laundering is actually defined by the act itself directly, which actually goes as the process through which an illegal fund, such as black money, is obtained from illegal activities and disguised as legal money, eventually portrayed as white money. So we understand that there are various amount of underground economy where we generate black money there, and we try to use such clever tactics by which we convert the black money into legitimate white money. Now this is the process of money laundering, and here the act is trying to curb the same. The objectives of the act is to prevent money laundering in the very first place and to prevent money entering into illegal activities, right? And also whatever the activities of this underground economies, illegal activities are trying to generate some monetary resources. So whatever the resources are, say gold, real estate, and some other kind of properties, so all kind of properties also can be confiscated under this act. Next, with reference to the offenders in money laundering, there is also a penalty of fine which can be without any limit, and also a minimum of 3 years rigorous imprisonment which can be extended to 7 years. Next, the appointing of adjudicating authority and appellate tribunal is also governed by the objectives of the Act here. Now, the ED or the Enforcement Directorate under the Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance will be the main investigative authority and agency for the offences under this Act. Next, the Financial Intelligence Unit India is also under the same department, under the same ministry, will be looking into the gathering of information related to various illegal activities of the particular act here. And finally, whatever the charges, whatever the offences will be classified later after the investigation, which are actually known as scheduled offences, they will be looked under individually under various kinds of acts, organizations such as local police, CBI, customs, SEBI, or any other investigative agency under this act. Now here, the author has given us a very, very important insight into what is the background of this act and how the act has actually deviated from the background it had. Now, from the 1980s to 2000s, there was an increasing amount of use of drug trafficking, drug peddling, and use of drugs among the people of the entire world. Now, this was a global issue, and also this issue was very, very serious in the US. And here we find that there was a huge volume of black money generated from drug trafficking. And that is why for the very first time in the entire world, and this is very important for the prelims, let me tell you, the United Nations Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances in 1988 was actually signed, and the members of the conventions, they tried to bring in various national legislations to prevent drug trafficking and the black money related to the same here. Now, the countries typically started to frame national legislations and stringent steps and so on. Now, in July 1989, the G7, which is the foremost industrial nations in the world, the G7 group, formed the Financial Action Task Force, which is looking at the various tracking of illegal activities related to money laundering and terrorist financing and so on. So this was actually the background of this kind of issue only. And finally, in 1980s, the UN General Assembly Political Declaration and Global Program of Action was signed, and typically following this in 2002, Indian Parliament also passed and enacted the PMLA Act. Now, initially when this PMLA Act was enacted by the Parliament of India, the main motive was to combat drug trafficking and the various issues of money laundering from drug trafficking itself, right? And here the offenses which were listed in the original or in the 2002 Act, original version, they actually fetched some offenses from the Indian Penal Code and also from the Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. So we can understand the background of PMLA Act is actually to prevent drug trafficking. And here, right now, this act has actually evolved into something totally different. So the main raison d'etre actually during the same time of 2002 was actually to combat the amount of drug trafficking and drug trade and the black money arising out of the same. But we have to understand over a period of time there were various amendments which were made into the act, and various offenses other than drug trafficking and so on, they were also included in this. And here article 253 of our constitutions is actually telling that with reference to any international convention, if Indian Parliament is trying to enact some act, right, it has to be confined to the subject matter of the decision. That means if Indian government is enacting the PMLA legislation, it has to be combating black money and drug trafficking. So the content on the subject matter of the agreement, international agreement, must be also similar with the domestic act here. So this is the provision of the constitution. But over a period of time, various amendments which can be related to some ordinary offenses which were listed in the IPC or some special laws which are already in force apart from the PMLA, such as for the example, the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988. Now this is actually an act which can be used to charge government servants, public servants with corruption offences. Now, the recent amendments to this PMLA Act is also including the corruption offences done by the public servants. So, right now technically there is no difference between a public servant who is, say, accepting a bribe and a hardcore drug trafficker. Generally, both of the offenses are very heinous. Obviously, taking a bribe is not good for the society, is not an ethical task. Drug trafficking is not a decent task too. But these two activities are not same. Money laundering and corruption charges are not same, right? But the thing is that there are various amendments which have been made to amend the PMLA Act according to this manner. Then the various crime proceeds under the Act can also include some innocent people. Whenever the ED or say other investigative agencies are investigating under PMLA Act, the other innocent individuals who can be involved in the beginning of the or say the end of the offense, they are also sometimes trapped in this act. And finally, the bail provision is very, very controversial here. According to section 55, the bail can be given to individuals who are charged under this PMLA Act only by the satisfaction of a judge. Now, a judge will be thinking before giving bail. Now, why the judge will be taking a risk of giving a bail to an accused individual under this act? Because if there will be any issues later on, the judge will be held accountable. So generally it is seen that in the country, under the PMLA Act, the judges are very, very, reluctant in giving bails to the individuals who are charged under this act. And here, this particular section was actually struck down under the Nikesh Tarachand Shah judgment of Supreme Court of 2018 as unconstitutional and violative of the fundamental rights of 14 and 21 of the Indian Constitution. But again, it was restored by the Indian Parliament by passing some minor amendments to this act, and the same was also upheld by the Vijay Madanlal Chaudhary versus Union of India 2022 Supreme Court judgment. Now here, we have to understand that these are the issues, and obviously the government of the day must be looking at these issues, and here these are also the issues which have been highlighted by the author of the editorial here. In the next article, we will be looking at the completion of 90 years of our own Reserve Bank of India, which is at the apex of the Indian financial system, right? And here, the central bank story of the last 90 years has been generally of stellar achievement. Now, it is a very, very important article from Indian economic aspect, and also right now right now UPSC is also asking about the historical origins of some very, very important authorities and bodies in the country. Now see, RBI is a legacy in itself, right? Starting from 1934 when the legislation of the RBI was actually enacted, right? From then till now, RBI has come a long way. The very first governor of the RBI was Sir Osborne Urquhart Smith, and the first Indian governor was Sir C.D. Deshmukh. This is very important for us for our prelims. And as you can see here, this is the very first document that established the RBI formally. Post partition, RBI ceased to be the currency authority for Pakistan, right? Earlier, before partition, RBI was the central bank of obviously the two nations, or say the entire subcontinent. When Pakistan was formed, it was diverted. Now, the main aspect of significance comes during 1991 economic reforms that is also popularly known as the LPG reforms. Now, during LPG reforms, RBI had to take very, very important steps to curb inflation in the country, to bring value, or to realize the value of the Indian rupee, and also to bring in overall macroeconomic stability. For this, what the RBI did is to transfer around 46 tons of gold to the Bank of England to actually seek some loans and returns. Next, it also did rupee devaluation twice in the rates of 9 to 10%. Now, these facts are very, very important for prelims, because UPSC can ask you what actually took place in the RBI's decision after the 1991 reforms. Next, RBI also tried to achieve full current account convertibility. Here, current account convertibility means according to the trades in various kinds of goods and services of the country, which pertains to the current account, not capital account. Capital account convertibility is not yet in the country in terms of full capital convertibility, right? Next, we also saw that RBI set up the interest rates of the lenders such as the banks, and these were deregulated. That means the interest rates of the banks and the various lenders were linked to the market rates. And finally, the new private sector banks were also given licenses during 1991 to 1995. And here, recent times, if we talk about from 2008 to 9, when the global financial crisis was taking place, Governor Y.V. Reddy took a very very set of good decisions. Firstly, it limited the amount of capital inflows, because we find that the global financial crisis was a global crisis, and this was related to the financial aspects of the crisis too. And the crisis typically took in banks and the various multinational corporations, and India needed to insulate or protect itself from the crisis. The most important way is to limit the amount of capital, or say money, that comes from abroad in terms of dollars and foreign currency into India. So that was limited, and that limited also the amount of issue and the crisis that also was seen in India. Next, especially with respect to the real estate sector, which also saw a very large amount of crash during the global financial crisis, the RBI also took good counter decision here. And also, RBI warned against the rapid foreign bank expansion in the country too. Next, under Raghuram Rajan, who was the governor of the RBI, he tried to internationalize the rupee, or say strengthen or make common the use of rupee in international transactions instead of the dollar. Then he also introduced inflation index bonds, or bonds where the amount of inflation in the economy, which actually reduce the real value of the bonds, were actually compensated for. So if you are trying to buy inflation index bonds, you are also protected from inflation, because whatever the interest rates you are getting on this bond, in addition you will be also getting the inflation in the particular year. So this was also introduced during his time. Then the freedom for branch expressions of various banks were also given, and this also promoted the reforms in the banking sector. Then we find that in 2016, demonetization also took place of the old 500 and 1000 rupees notes, and new notes of 500 and 2000s were issued. And recently also the 2000 rupees notes were taken back as of now. Next, a very important aspect happened in 2016 by setting up the Monetary Policy Committee. Monetary Policy Committee is a very important committee consisting of 6 members, 3 from the RBI, 3 from the Government of India. They will be looking into the various inflation targeting mechanisms via the repo rate mechanism in the country. And finally, in the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how the government of the India and also the RBI followed a very lenient way of money supply. That means it tried to increase money supply in the economy by following accommodative monetary policy to infuse demand in the country. And also, during the COVID pandemic, we saw a huge amount of boost of using UPI payments in the country too. So this was all the evolution of RBI over a period of time, and these small things are also very important for your exam. Now in the final article, we find that recently a moon of Jupiter has been studied, and a very trace amount of ozone deposits have been found on the region. And here in our earth we have the ozone layer, which is located in the lower stratosphere, and the ozone layer is very important for our survival. Why? Because of typically one thing, that it blocks the harmful UV rays from entering the earth's atmosphere into the earth. And here we find that the UV rays of B and C grade, they damage DNA and trigger mutations. They also inhibit the plant growth. And we can find that these are the various issues of the UV rays which the ozone layer above us in the stratosphere is trying to protect us from. And if the detection of ozone in the moon of Castillo in the Jupiter's orbit is found, that means there is trace amounts of ozone and oxygen which is available. And here the strong evidence of ozone on Castillo is signifying that the atmospheric conditions are kind of stable. The presence of ozone means that there is a layer of air which is forming on the atmosphere. That means there is stable atmospheric condition on the moon of Jupiter, and also pointing at potential habitability of human life, future human life on the moon of the Jupiter too. Because we have to understand, ozone means oxygen, as we have discussed, and also from the various molecules of oxygen and various other molecules such as sulfur, carbon and so on, we find the very first trace of organic life in the form of amino acids. So amino acids are actually typically formed by these chemicals, and from amino acids proteins are formed, and through proteins life have emerged on the earth for the very first time. So it can be the thing that this is a very remarkable aspect as to how human life can also proliferate outside the earth in Jupiter's moon here. Now we come to Prelims Snippet, where we will be discussing 4 important topics in a very short manner. Firstly, Institute of Eminence status. Next, heat waves, then scores portal by SEBI and National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. Now, Institute of Eminence status is actually a recognition scheme for higher education institutes in the country. It is actually given by the University Grants Commission in 2017. Very important aspects for prelims. The benefits of the tag is that they have the freedom or autonomy to set up their own curriculum, to hire faculties, and also to set up campuses abroad. Next, the public institutions of which are having this tag, they will be granted up to 1000 crores rupees. This is which is equivalent to around 14 billion Indian rupee or 180 million dollars in 2023. So each institute of eminence will be getting this award. Typically IITs, IIMs and the various other institutes have gotten this tag here in the country. And finally, we have to note that no funding is actually given to the private institutions too. In the next one, we'll be looking at a very short concept, which is heat wave. Now, according to the IMD or India Meteorological Department, whenever the maximum temperature in plains cross 40 degrees Celsius and in hills cross 30 degrees Celsius for at least consecutive 2 days, it is a heat wave condition. And recently the IMD has told that between the months of March to May, India will be seeing more than 15 plus days of heat waves. And as you can see in this particular map also, in the entire country, right, the above normal heat wave conditions are prevailing now. So it is expected that India will be seeing a very serious kind of heat wave, and the impact of the same will be also felt by the country. That is why you all are also advised to take proper precautions, particularly to our friends who will be appearing for prelims examination during also the months of the same time. In the next one, we'll be looking at a very important portal from the SEBI, which is the scores portal, which is a centralized grievance redressal system. Now we know in stock markets there can be various issues from customers, from brokers, from any other stakeholders in the sector. So for any issue we have to give a particular solution to. So any issue covered under SEBI Act, Securities Contract Act, Regulation Act, Depositories Act, Companies Act 2013. So these particular acts will be purviewed by this course portal. So anyone who has some issues with listed companies, registered transfer agents, brokers, stock exchanges, depository participants, mutual funds, portfolio managers, other entities such as credit information companies and so on, they can go on this portal and register their issues, grievances, and the grievances will be sorted out on this particular platform, and everyone can also track it because it is completely online. In the final article, we'll be looking at the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, which is under the Department of Pharmaceuticals, because recently the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority has revised the ceiling of around 900 drug formulations in the country. It is under the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, please note it is not under Ministry of Health. And the functions it performs is that it is enforcing the various provisions of the Drug Prices Control Order. That means the various prices, the various availability, the shortages, and the various steps that are needed to taken to control the price of the drugs in the country is actually regulated by this authority. Then it will be also collecting the various data related to the same, and also sponsoring the research and study, and also will be implementing the same in the country related to drug pricing formulations and the various issues arising out of the same year. So this was all for today. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. I hope that you enjoyed the discussion today, and following this there will be quiz which is mandatory for all to participate, and please do comment in the comments, let us know your answers too. All the best till we meet again for your examination and future endeavors. Thank you.